when for the first time the European Lesbian Conference, the board member, meet through Skype, we were starting to think, well, we decided to act. We decided to reflect. We decided to transform. But how should we start that? And it was obviously we should and we need to start to understand our own history. And it was such great moments to understand that I, as a person which was living openly from 16 as a lesbian, falling in love with women, I realized, oh, I didn't know that. Or like, oh, where are the great women? And that has happened. And I'm honored to welcoming you, Katherine O'Donnell, which has organized the first Lesbian Live conference 26 years ago. Thank you to be here. Because what we did understand, if we are not taking in the present the future, we will not reflect the same. And I'm honored now to hand over the microphone, to welcoming you, to give you a pass of wonderful women, which I'm so happy to listen your history.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maria. I'm just going to move straight into inviting my panelists to join me here. I'm actually just going to moderate, keep the time. So I'd like to invite Evian and Eva and Lepa and Lonike, please, to the stage. Thank you. I think there's going to be a lot of this in Vienna over the weekend, isn't there? A lot of women hugging each other. What we've organized for this session is that we have a running order and that each woman is going to speak for 10 minutes about her experience in getting involved in the very early wave of lesbian activism here in Europe, in building a movement and community. And then we're going to move from the kind of individual contributions and have a conversation between the four people directly involved. If there are people who really do want to make a comment or a question, be very, very energetic in putting your hand up. We just have an hour, and we really need to hear from these people. They were there. They did it all. So I would prefer not to take questions unless somebody has something very, very pressing, and we'll just have these people speak with us. Thank you.
I've got something on my... Introduce me.
So our first speaker is Evian Chavez, and she's going to speak to us about her experience of organizing the first lesbian conference in 1980 in Amsterdam. Thank you, Evian.
Not sitting, not sitting, not sitting. No, sitting. Double check. Just 1 second.
Oh!
It will be great. No, it will be not a good start. Great start.
Take care, it's not good yet. It's not good yet. Okay, is this on? I think so. My name is Katherine Chavez, and I feel it's a great honor to be here. I never expected this. And what got me here was a tweet I saw half a year ago in March that said, first lesbian European conference in Vienna in October. I thought, no way. We organized a lesbian conference in 1980. So I tweeted back, and I got a response. And we got discussing. We exchanged emails, lots of questions, stuff like that. So we had a Skype conversation, which was very interesting. And I was asked to come over here to tell you. So that's why I'm here. And I had to dig up my memories, because 1980 is quite some time ago. And that took me some time in moving back and forth, etc. So how did I get involved in the lesbian conference in Amsterdam in I forgot to change. Okay, that's the tweet exchange. And then it brought me back to Amsterdam, which doesn't, it got stuck. Well, I'll start speaking and Maria will help me. Yeah, thank you. I was a really not even out lesbian at that time. And I had a flatmate who went to Barcelona to the IGA conference, the International Gay Association, which now is called the International Lesbian and Gay Association. And he said to me, well, he told me about that conference. In that conference, there were, I think, about 170 people, and a big group of them were lesbians. And they had their lesbian caucus, which is something I heard happened a year ago and was the origin of this conference. That was a conference in Cyprus, I think. The women in Barcelona really felt the need to meet more with each other, be more visible, spend more time, discuss their own subjects, because there may be an overlap, but the problems lesbians face are different from those that the men face. So I thought, well, if he proposes me to join that group in Amsterdam, it might be an idea. They were offering in Barcelona to organize the conference that year. The decision was made at Easter, and in December, the conference was going to be in Amsterdam. And I joined during the summer somewhere. And then suddenly I was in Belgium in also an IGA conference, 60 people, of whom 4 were women, 3 from Amsterdam, and I was one of them. And there were, well, maybe there were a bit more women. But I was really overwhelmed, of course. I wasn't out still. By the time we reached December, we had a conference between Christmas and New Year's Eve. We approached about 250 groups by post, mind you. That takes time. What happens to a letter is it gets to someone of the organization. That someone puts it in a post box for the appropriate group. Then, some weeks later, the appropriate group meets and sees the letter. And then before they answer, you're at least a month further. And we did not really get very much response. It took time, and there was not a lot of attention. So but we got organized anyways. We had this conference with 80 women from about 14 to 17 countries. That there are different reports from that. I tried to look it back, but I could not find the precise numbers. So we are quite a bit bigger by now, at least 5 times, and that's really amazing. And we got together and we talked about all the subjects that are here still as well, like sexuality, legal stuff, what do we have? Political action, how to organize, the media, family, children, etc. And of course, we didn't have enough time. We wanted more time. That was one of the outcomes. So there were women from Italy, and they accepted to organize the next conference prior to the next IGA conference in Turin. And it's okay. I'm not used to working with a PowerPoint. We didn't have that then. So there, in 3 months, the women got organized and got 200 women together. And that was really an amazing job, especially if you know a bit more about the backgrounds. At that time, they were not very organized in big organizations in Italy in general. There was the most important group was, I think, 40, which was part of a political party, if I remember well. We had a meeting in the women's house. We stayed in cheap hotels, and we had dinner in another place. You can see the photo there at the top left. It's actually us, all 200 women, walking to lunch. People thought we were having a demonstration, so that was really good for visibility. One time at the restaurant, somebody who was serving us the meals was asking me, "Do you have families?" Yes, we do. Of course we do. We're just as human as anybody else, but it shows the lack of knowledge in the general public of what lesbians are. So we had a lot of meetings, same subjects as in Amsterdam. We continued. And then at the end, we had a plenary session, which I remember very well. I think you can still see me if you recognize me. I hardly recognize myself on the top left, together with a few other women from Norway and another woman from Amsterdam standing with her arm. And she's standing there for a reason with her arm like that, because we had a very big discussion. All subjects were okay, but there was one thing that was really important to discuss, and we didn't agree upon. We had very different voices from very different experiences in our past. So that discussion got very tough, and we were not used to it. Not in that way. We Dutch are very pragmatic. We try to get compromise. That's our polder model. And in some areas we're famous for polder discussions, because we always want to get together, well, to defend ourselves from the water. The dice are strong, but it's because we are united. But we were not united on structure. What happened was that the 140 women from, mainly the 140 women from Italy, were separatists. They did not want to work with men, and we were from a mixed organization. We, the Secretariat, the International Lesbian Information Secretariat from Amsterdam, were working within the COC, which was one of the oldest organizations in Europe, I think, and it was mixed. We were used to working mixed. We even had the men doing our babysitting in Amsterdam and cooking for us. So we worked well with them. But not so in Italy. And you can imagine a bit of macho behavior from Italian men and other problems. So there was distrust with us, and distrust with being part of the IGA, a mixed organization. The outcome was that after this very tough discussion, you can see, I forgot to tell, that there's a huge amount of women there standing up. It was, for us, it felt like a kind of tsunami of women coming up from the back and raising, because first in the back the women were standing up, and then more and more and more. And all their strong emotions were directed towards us representing this mixed club, so to say. So, well, what do? We had thought we'd be autonomous and with our own part within the mixed organization. That was really not possible anymore. Nobody wanted to accept that. So we ended up with ILIS as a women-only or lesbian-only organization working by itself. And then, 2 days later, the next day, we went to the IGA conference, and we had a big culture shock there. So it made us understand a bit. The culture shock was that we came from very basic conditions in the women's conference, in the lesbian conference. Everything as cheap as possible. The only thing that was spent a lot of money on was on interpreters. They had even managed to get subsidy for that. And then there was this very luxurious 5-star hotel with a swimming pool, big rooms, big beds, big everything. Very expensive. Most of the women couldn't afford it. So that got the women angry at that conference. And we understood a bit more about the background. At least I do now, looking back. At that time, it wasn't very clear to me. But we really came from different points of departure, you could say. And that made it really difficult for us to have that discussion. What was really difficult also was that we were not trusted. No one was going to take over the ILIS secretariat, but we were not trusted. So that was tough. In the end, after a lot of discussion, we finally succeed to convince the plenary that, okay, we would keep the secretariat because there was really no one else. No one was having the infrastructure for hosting. 1 minute, oh gosh. For hosting a secretariat. So that was really tough. But we continued. We continued till the next year in Easter in Belgium, Lichtaard. We had a discussion again. And I should do it with this one. Yeah, that's me again. Not that I'm the center of this talk, but this is a photo taken by Eva. The others were too. And she got me at the point that I was desperate in the plenary session. Because again, we had a discussion on Eliane Morrison, Belgian teacher who was suspended for saying she is a lesbian. She was a lesbian. I think she has passed by now. We wanted to support her legally with her hunger strike demonstrations and stuff, but there was a split north and south because we look different. And in the previous talk, it was mentioned that if you work with the system, yeah, that's a bit complicated because still the system will survive. And I think that was really what was the discussion about at that time. Eliane wanted to do a legal action. She actually did go to the court in Strasbourg in the end, but that was after time. But we supported her hunger strike with demonstrations. Some people thought her case was not a case of discrimination. I still think it was. But that was one of the reasons that some groups didn't want to participate. So we had a discussion about that, and that discussion got so heated, it was getting out of hand, and that's when I was like that. I didn't know what to do anymore. It was my first time. The translation had failed. English-speaking women and French-speaking women were mainly opposite opinion, and couldn't understand each other anymore because the interpreters, in the heat of the discussion and the speed of the discussion, couldn't follow it. I could understand both languages, but I can't manage when 60 women in front of me are really getting almost into a fight. So I said, I don't know anymore. That was a breaking point in the discussion, and we took a break. And after the break, we decided, okay, we have to respect our mutual points of view. Everybody can either take part under the umbrella of ILIS in the actions, if you want to. If you don't want to, that's fine too. You do your own thing. Maybe you do an action on your own behalf or not. It's okay. We can agree to not agree. What was the result of the actions, and I think that's important to know, is that because of the pressure outside of Belgium, finally on the inside of Belgium, they got her on the agenda of the media. She got publicity inside Belgium, which wasn't possible before that. So even if you disagree on the action, you can still achieve something. ILIS had many more conferences about, thank you, about 8 in total, I think. We continued, well, the secretariat changed at some point, I don't remember exactly, to Eva's group. I think it was in Belgium, but Eva will know better. We had the bulletin, and we had a cookbook. With this cookbook, the Libro de Cocina, 2 people from our group went to Latin America to help Latin American groups organize. We wrote it ourselves, and it was based on our experiences with lesbian groups, and meant specifically for lesbian groups. We had representatives present at the UN conferences in Copenhagen, in Nairobi, and in Beijing. And we continued using a bulletin to spread the information. And the last bulletin was from '98. It was supposed to go electronically, but I've never seen an email with a bulletin after that. I think ILIS stopped functioning in 1998. Well, I think that's a history. There's much more to tell, but time is up, I fear. But let's start make some more history with this conference.
Hello. Oh, there we are. So I always think that Ireland is a very far place, that it's remote from everywhere, which is why I think Irish people have a particular fondness for the Finns. So Finland seems to be nearly as remote as Ireland. So the next speaker is going to be Eva Isaacson, and she's going to talk about what it was like to work in ILIS coming from Finland. Thank you.
No. It's great. We get support, thank you. It looks like it is a PDF, and this is because even if I put on...
Yes. So we can't do it like this. But you will need to switch. Okay. I think it will work, yes. With the arrows, you can switch.
Hello, it is good to be here. And I am hard of hearing, so I hope you will understand my English. It is over 30 years ago I was an international activist. So it is not fresh in my memory. And I needed to explore my own past. In the early 80s, I was young. And my Finnish organization, SETA, it was very young. It is also a mixed organization. Lesbians were a minority. This was very typical for many North and West organizations back that time. There was lesbian feminist autonomous groups in Finland, but they were started late. Back then, everything was so new. We were bursting into bloom. And one day, we got this wonderful report in the mail. International Lesbian Conference. I was so thrilled and excited. I needed very much to go. There was an International Gay Association conference in Torino, Italy, and Ili's conference was right before that. And SETA sent me to both. Yes. The next 3 years were intense. I attended 5 Ili's conferences. I made newsletters and conference reports. What happened and how did it happen? I have all photographs from Ili's conferences. Here you see Torino conference. Women in Holland, Sweden, Germany, Belgium, France in the pictures. And lots of women from Italy. This is from Belgium. Here is Truus from Holland. She is using her hands. Very animated. And next conference was very small. It was to be in Paris, but instead it was in Sheffield, England. Only a handful of women come. And then there was Paris. I will never forget this house, women's house, how full of women it was. Very full. Only a short time after my first conference, I was in Stockholm. The interpret women from Holland asked me whether Finnish women wanted to take over their work. And I said yes. I very much wanted to be activist. Soon we were doing very much of this secretary work, making newsletters and reports, mailing them, and collecting membership fees. It was a big amount of work, but SETA made it possible because we had photocopy machine and so on. Here you see the covers of our newsletters and reports. In Helsinki, we made 11 newsletters, 3 reports, 174 pages. All went through the photocopy machine, and I can still smell the hot ink. This is from the last newsletter we made in Helsinki. By then, I was very tired. I wrote a long personal text. Take a moment to read. hearing it makes me feel sympathy with my young self. I was feeling I had stumbled when hissing at the stars. I also have notebooks. As I'm very hard of hearing, I took pen and paper everywhere, and I still have the old fitting discussions. They are a mess. No names, no dates. This is from the Torino conference, a discussion with my new sermon fund. Here you see how I was asked about taking the Ilish Secretariat to Finland. And I tried to be careful, but very quickly I said yes. And 2 years later, you see Ilish Secretariat leaving from Finland to Oslo. Osta from Oslo came to Helsinki to fetch all the papers. We were talking about the Dutch women here. And Oslo held the secretariat for a time. Next was Switzerland, and then it was back to Amsterdam. And so, what happened indeed? I have no time for deep analysis. We were young and eager, but we did not have resources. It was very expensive to travel all the way from Finland. For example, Seta had money, and it was coming from disco evenings. One of my travels was paid for one disco evening money. And then was the AIDS hysteria. It stopped that. No more disco and no more travel money. So I could not attend Irish conferences anymore. Other Finnish women started new groups. I like to think Irish was one of the influences. I have newsletters and I have my memories, but otherwise, now it looks that Irish Secretariat was never in Finland if you read printed sources. It is missing from everywhere. Very little has been written on Irish. And I am a librarian. I made a search for printed sources, and there was very little and very many errors. It would be wonderful if there was more sources, and if we could document our past, our international lesbian activism. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eva. And in many ways, you've introduced the work of our next speaker, Lonneke van den Honard, who's going to give us an overview of the lesbian archives in the Netherlands, which really is a template for best practice worldwide, I think. Thanks very much, Lonneke.
Thank you, Katherine. Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be here, and I will thank the organizers for inviting me to give you a little bit of insight in the history of lesbian archiving. Almost 50 years ago, Jo Nessel made her book collection in New York, in her apartment, available to the lesbian community. Soon afterwards, she and Deborah Edel formed a women's collective and set up the Her Story archive. Their vision was summed up in a statement of purpose. The Lesbian Her Story archives exist to gather and preserve records of lesbian lives and activities so that future generations will have ready access to materials relevant to their lives. They realized that lesbian community history was slipping away. Every time a lesbian died without telling her story and her belongings were sold or thrown out, a voice was lost. Too frequently, they felt mainstream historians were obliterating the lesbian identity of those who made it into history books. If lesbians don't take responsibility for recording our history, these women thought, no one will. Still in existence now, the Lesbian Her Story Archives is the oldest historical lesbian collection in the world, blossoming out of Nestle's apartment and eventually transplanting itself to a more public Brooklyn townhouse. Stories of the Lesbian Her Story Archives are well known and even legendary in gay and lesbian studies and among archivists. And I had the honor to visit them over there, and it was lovely, it's great. More lesbian archives were soon to follow in other parts of the world, mainly Europe, Canada, and the USA. At the time, women were determined to create a space for themselves, and the founding of a lesbian and women's archive fit right into this ambition. Many of the archives have their roots in lesbian feminist movements and academia. The Spinbodem Archives, founded in 1973 in Berlin, this archive, which still exists today, conquered many challenges and is one of the largest collections in the German-speaking world. The Netherlands followed in 1981. Like Jo Nessel in New York, Henny Smit opened up her book collection in her home in Leeuwarden in the northern part of the Netherlands. A nationwide conference on archiving lesbian lives was held in March in 1982. At the time, there was a shortage of information in the public libraries and the university libraries. The Gay Documentation Center, Homodoc, was founded in the University of Amsterdam in 1978. Unhappy about the lack of accessible information and research in the field of homosexuality, students and teachers set up Documentation Center. Lesbians, however, thought the center was too male-oriented, and also the idea of housing a lesbian archive in a place like the university that was not run by lesbians was inconceivable. So, between 1982 and 1985, lesbian archives were set up in 4 cities in the Netherlands: Utrecht, Nijmegen, and Eindhoven and Amsterdam. The goal was to make a lesbian collection easily accessible at a more regional level. The mere fact of being able to browse through a bookcase full of lesbian literature was a wonderful experience. 10 years after Her Story stated its purpose, the Lesbian Archives in Amsterdam formulated its own goal as follows: to collect and preserve sources that reflect the lives of lesbians and their activities. The archive keeps the documents from being obliterated, ensuring future generations of lesbians easy access to the material that constitutes their history. One of the key characteristics of lesbian archives is that they widen the meaning of the space where documents are stored. You could say that lesbian archives are part storage place, part library, part museum, and part community gathering space. This brings me to a second characteristic of lesbian archives. They create a safe space not only for documents and materials, but above all for women, in particular for women of color who time and again have to fight for their space, even within the wide lesbian community. And in this context, Shanta Smith-Cruz is an important colleague and champion of Black lesbian archives. The third characteristic is the collective. Lesbians form collectives in order to manage their archives. They are no leaders, and every woman has an equal say in the collective. The basic tenet is that the community's interests come before the individuals. The fourth characteristic is the ideology. Lesbian archives have always been founded on strong ideologies. We set up lesbian archives in order to make our common lesbian history visible, because lesbians are written out of patriarchal history books. So in some archives, collections were ordered alphabetically according to the writer's first name. A surname was considered to be patriarchal, as it generally comes from the father. As Nessel put it, the archive is a healing place. It is filled with voices announcing our autonomy and self-possession. The roots of the archives lie in the silenced voices, the love letters destroyed, the pronouns changed, the diaries carefully edited, the pictures never taken, the euphemized distortions that patriarchy would let pass. The Netherlands saw a development in the 1990s and the 2000s. A more pragmatic attitude was preferable to an ideology. Self-preservation often meant concessions were required. Choices for what should and shouldn't be preserved were based on the space available. Men were allowed to visit. Archives were merged. Ilia, too, is the result of a merger between two lesbian archives and the Gay Documentation Center. Only the lesbian archives in Nijmegen, in the eastern part of the country, has retained its autonomy. The lesbian archives in Amsterdam used to specialize in sound recordings. It contains numerous hours of recordings of women festivals, lectures, political gatherings, and conferences. All of that makes this a unique and valuable collection. These archives also house a special photo collection documenting lesbian history since the mid-70s. And I show you some of my darlings, and I couldn't kill them, so we go to them very quick. A lot of challenges were overcome these years. Ideological wars about pretty much everything raged, often paralyzing the movement. Some lesbian archives even shut down under the weight of unresolved conflicts. Lesbian archives are threatened by a shortage of funds and space. Those archives that depend on donation and volunteers are in danger of losing continuity and of failing to preserve the material sustainably, especially fragile material like cassettes. Making the documentation available to the public is a labor-intensive task. Despite the fact that a lot of material has been transferred to computers, archiving and documenting materials remains a specialized field. There has long been a discussion on lesbian archives' dependence on the government for financial support. The Dutch government guarantees the existence of ILIA as a heritage organization, but public support can make archives vulnerable, as governments aren't always as reliable in this respect as we'd like them to be. This discussion is even more relevant in the United States, where Her Story does not accept any money from what they see as a hostile government. Ilia has a unique collection that reflects women's lives. A huge volume of documentation has been preserved over the years. Not only books and magazines, but also newsletters, posters, photos, buttons, banners, t-shirts, and of course, the well-known sound recordings. Very quick overview of what we have in our archives. We work together with the Women's Institute Atria, the Lesbian Archives in Nijmegen, the COC, the Dutch LGBTI organization, ILGA, the City Archives, and the International Institute of Social History and the University of Amsterdam, amongst others. We make the collection visible to the public through our website, social media, and exhibitions. We now face the challenge of digitizing vulnerable materials. Cassettes will not remain intact forever, but also collecting information of websites, social media, Facebook. How do we do that? How are we going to do that? For the next 5 years, we are digitizing the most of the vulnerable materials. Accessibility also has changed. It's no longer enough to just place materials on shelves. There are databases and keyword systems. Ilia works with a thesaurus, the Homosaurus, which is also available in English. Because we want to ensure the long-term preservation of our collection, we cannot always give people access to the archives. The material is simply too fragile. Ilia complies with professional library and archive standards. This places requirements on storage space, workplaces, employees, and computerization. And I'm not saying this is the only way to go. If you do not have the financial resources to comply with these standards, there are other ways to store documentation. Collecting and storing to begin with are our first priorities. Without that, we will lose our history. There is no blueprint for doing that. Just do it. Take a shoebox. Put it on your hard disk, whatever. Do not throw away your history and our heritage. And this I leave up to you. Thank you very much and enjoy the conference.
And our final speaker is going to be Lepa Mladevenek, who has at least one friend in the audience, and is going to be talking to us about what it was like to organize the 1980s in the former Yugoslavia. We're not going to have time to have our conversation. We're going to have to just continue that over coffee breaks, lunches, and the rest of the weekend. So you can take the remaining 10 minutes. You still have your 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay, I prepared to 10, 12. I love lesbians, so that's why they're all screaming. I was born in 1950. What shall I do with this? I was born in 1954 in Yugoslavia. It was a socialist, communist country, part of Eastern Europe. And so I have lots of common history with my sisters from the East, lots of them here. On the same time, Yugoslavia was not under the Russian Empire, and therefore it meant that there was a free circulation of people, books, cultures, and I was in the 80s hitchhiking all these different towns that we were mentioning here, primarily looking for women's bookstores and searching those books like Lesbian Nation, etc. at that time. So my history is on Yugoslavia, 10 minutes, and the first year that we are counting, that I'm counting my feminist years, is the international conference we, in fact, the feminists before me in Yugoslavia organized in '78 a huge international feminist conference with the big names at that time from Italy, France, UK, etc. And it was a turning point for us because in our Eastern European countries, the ideology was that the class struggle will resolve all the questions and liberate all the people, because that's part of the Marxist ideology, and my sisters from the East maybe remember. And in the 78, we decided with this conference to say no. The oppression of women can only be resolved with women organizing ourselves. And so that was a turning point for us. And then I will go straight to 1987, which was another historical year. It was a first lesbian group founded in Ljubljana, but I have to connect it a little bit with what was said before. In 1986 was a huge international lesbian conference in Geneva, and it was mentioned here. And there is an anecdote about this conference, a very famous one. It was me and Suzana Tratnik from Slovenia. And after the conference, I was complaining that Suzana was, every day I saw her kissing in another woman in another corner. And I was working in a self-organized kitchen, you know, trying. But what happened? Suzana came back and organized a first lesbian group in Yugoslavia and probably in Eastern Europe. So that's a power of love. And kissing can get us. And this is a photo of 5 years after the. Okay, so then we go. Then we go to another lesbian group, which is called Lila Iniciativa in Zagreb. We were still in Yugoslavia, but I wanted to show you. Listen, we lesbians were part of Europe even then. No, where I am? I know. I'm looking something else. So here I can't see. Yeah, I'm looking at this. That's fine. You see, these are the, it's too much light for you to see very well. If some lights were off, it would be better. But anyway, somebody else is organizing this, not me. So you see, we were part of Europe, you know. These are the leaflets of the lesbian group, you know. So here we are. And then I want to, in fact, come back to this. In 87 was important because we organized something which was Yugoslav Feminist Encounters. It was crucial for us, for feminists to meet each other inside of Yugoslavia, mainly from three big cities. And here was a place where we lesbians for the first time met each other in our own country. And so that was a exciting moment, and in fact, after that, Lila Iniciativa was made, and then we come to 91, and then the war started in my country, and that completely changed my life, and I became an anti-war activist. And worked with women who survived male violence, war violence, and sexual violence in war, and then I learned how difficult it is to put together being a lesbian and war. I mean, I couldn't put it in one sentence that I'm a lesbian working with war survivors. No way at that time. No way, because ethical hierarchy it puts lesbians here and war survivors here, and so it cannot go in my body somehow. So it took me 3 years to write this essay I wrote about notes on a feminist lesbian in the wartime. Okay, so then by 95. It was moving to be the end of the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we organized Labris. Is this Labris? Yes, our feminist lesbian. Well, there are different things about Labris. One is that after we organized Labris, there is another Labris, a sister Labris in Budapest, because of some love exchange, of course. So sisters from Labris Budapest will celebrate 20 years this November, so you're all welcome to the party. I mean, I'm inviting you to the party, but okay. And then there was a Labris, there is a Labris in Bishkek also. Yes, sister from Bishkek, of course. Yes, I've been there. I had to see all my lovely sisters. And there we found also in some notes that there was a short time Labris in Krakow in Poland, but also because of some exchange, but not anymore. Okay, so, but here is also important, it's all this light. I mean, you don't see these beautiful faces because of all this light. What are we doing here? We have got lots of lesbian support during the wartime, from lesbians and feminists from different countries. And here is a coffee we got from John Nestler, believe it or not, you know, somebody was mentioning her name, and another friend, a lesbian from US. They sent us coffee, so we are taking this coffee in our hands and sending them back this photograph. But I put purposely these photos because solidarity, lesbian solidarity and feminist solidarity was a ground for us, feminists and lesbians, to survive during the wartime, even though I live in a town where there was no war directly, but you cannot survive wartime without solidarity, so that's why we need to go in places now and see how we can support them. So I want to thank to all lesbians from Germany, many of them from Germany, from Switzerland, from Italy, from UK, from different places. They've all come without us asking them anything. Even to come and bring us chocolates and coffee. We were really happy. I mean, chocolate in wartime and cigarettes, like, that's it, you know. Okay, so then we turn to another solidarity combination. In 1996, there was a Seconda Settimana Lesbica. It's the second lesbian week in Italy, in Bologna, and feminist lesbians from Italy collected their own money to invite 12 lesbian feminists from states of former Yugoslavia to come to their Italian week. Even though it was all in Italian language, but we came there and it felt like we came to the lesbian land, you know, just like, ah. And so we were really happy. I didn't find any photo from the Italian, but what happened was with this power of love, as Viljana says, and screams, ah, yes. Again, the lesbians from Slovenia came back from the group Cassandra and organized the first lesbian week for us. So that's how it goes. So these are the photos of the first lesbian week. We were in the mountain, famous mountain Pohorje in Slovenia. And you know what? The first thing what we had to do is hold hands and speak out loud the word lesbian in our language, because we were so full of hatred and of lesbophobia in our bodies. So inside of the woods, this is how we started it, and that I never forget, because it really freed me from the burden of 3,000 years of hating of lesbians that is concentrated in the word lesbian. So I love the word lesbian. And I also purposely put this other photo of a lesbian, because there is one lesbian who says, you know, one of the vengeance to patriarchy is that we are happy. So she's cool. And here are just some photos from another, you know, randomly we made some lesbian weeks. in Croatia and in Slovenia, and slowly the lesbians from other parts like Bosnia and Herzegovina, and here is one from Kosovo, and here is finally one from, this is a whole gang of lesbians later on from Bosnia and Herzegovina. Was important for us because all of them that you see on this photo have had childhood in the wartime, under the snipers or inside of the cellars, and their parents living in wartime. So it's always important to remember there was a war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Croatia, in Kosovo, and in Europe, and we need to know that there are, okay, but we are happy here. And I just wanted to make a list. These are some lesbian groups that were in all this time in states of ex-Yugoslavia, and we also have Lesbian Pristina at that time, etc. We also had Lesbian March in Belgrade in 2015, very important for us. It was really, we were there, some of us were there. And at the end, I want to say a few things to sum up. One is this power of solidarity, which I already mentioned. And here is a photo with a Roma lesbian. It's crucially important for us to reach out lesbians who are not of the majority nationality or groups. And the other one is Azra from Bosnia and Herzegovina. She made me this shirt, and it says death to fascism and freedom to lesbians, because that was our old Azra made me. And so just to summarize, what happened was that when I think of lesbian history, lesbian movement, we started with women's movement. And we started with women's movement, which in fact was a separatist movement, because we had to move from men to meet each other, to understand who women are after 3,000 years of patriarchy. And inside, at least that was also in Yugoslavia and in many other countries, out of women's movement, we formed feminist politics, strong feminist politics. So some of us then became lesbians inside of the women's movement, like me. So then we made another separatist movement, which was the lesbian movement, and for lesbians only. And I really also want to add on what you said. In some countries like Italy, France, and Spain, the word separatism is used with love in mouth, because it really meant that we bond each other to feel power in order to constitute ourselves as subjects in the history in which, as Audre Lorde said, we were not meant to survive. And to end with another one, which is the statement of Monique Witting that lesbians are runaways of patriarchy. I love that, because sometimes I'm not only fighting, I want to run away without observing eyes of patriarchy, but really in tender, loving, and passionate loving of women. That's who we are.
So if I was in Ireland, we would consider finishing just 7 minutes late to be perfectly good time. But I'm in Austria, so I'm afraid we have to finish our session now. And it's just my job to remind you that there are teas and coffees available downstairs. Our next sessions take place at 11:30. If you'd like to have a break, you can leave the hall, or you're free to stay here. So it just remains to give a very big thank you to our speakers for reminding us of the power of our history.